Hi there, this is Marin Bass, and welcome to Chapter 8 of the Ultimate Grant Proposal Blueprint, turning your blueprint into an A-plus proposal on paper or online. Now, I have to say, when I was pulling together all the materials for this final session in our 8-session series, I was really faced with a huge challenge because no matter how much or how little time I have to teach any given topic, I always want to pack more into it than I have time to share. I always want to share absolutely everything I know. I want you to have all the tools, all the takeaways, all the frameworks, absolutely everything. And believe it or not, even over 8 sessions of 90 minutes to 2 hours each of material, I'm still left with so much more that I would love for you to take away with you. So my challenge was to sort through everything that we haven't covered yet and think for myself, what is it that I most want you to have, to know, to be able to do, and by way of skill or insight or understanding or experience or aha or affirmation that will best help you take everything we've worked on together during the first 7 sessions in building your ultimate grant proposal blueprint and be able to translate it into what we're calling the A-plus proposal. So it's a little bit of a potpourri. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I'm sure there are some surprises ahead for you. Let's take a look at what's coming up. We actually have 4 lessons to go through in this, our final session. In lesson A, I call the myth of the A-plus proposal. Let's take a peek inside the black box. What's that all about? You are in for a real surprise, I promise you. In lesson B, it's all about the inner world of the quote-unquote grant maker. Why am I putting quotation marks around that word grant maker? You'll find out. This is our reality check on the inner world of the grant maker. Lesson C, we're diving right into the question of how do we make our way through an RFP. So what's an RFP again? Making sense of the grant maker's guidelines. And finally, in lesson D, we pull all of this together and talk about the ins and outs of creating a winning proposal, putting it all together on paper or online. So we have a lot to cover. As always, let's take a look at what I want your takeaways to be. You will use your 3D vision to bust the pervasive myth of the A-plus proposal and understand how grant decisions are really made. You'll learn why grant makers never give grants to support your organization and what they really want most of all in the whole wide world. Sounds intriguing. You'll have 2 invaluable frameworks for approaching the process of matching any grant maker's guidelines to the elements of your ultimate grant proposal blueprint. You'll learn my definition of a winning proposal, and you'll learn how to make good choices about formatting, language, attachments, and so on when you're pulling a proposal together. And finally, as a result of this entire course coming out of session 8, I want you to have greater confidence that you now have the skills, the tools, and the 3D perspective you need to craft an A-plus proposal every time. So let's pay a visit to Al Einstein and see how you would answer these questions now at the beginning of your journey. Pay attention. I may have a twist or two here for you. If an organization is struggling in its grant seeking, it's not always the fault of the grant writer. True or false? How about this one? An A-plus proposal will beat out a B- proposal every time. True or false? When you've seen one grant maker, you've seen them all. True or false? Proposals that win grant dollars are those proposals that make it easy for funders to say yes and hard to say no. True or false? When putting your proposal together, it's a good idea to imagine that the reviewers reading it are doing so under the best of all possible circumstances. True or false? And how about this one? When working on an online proposal, it's a good idea to do your work directly in the online form to make sure you answer all the questions within the allowed word limits. True or false? Did you catch a couple twists there? You had to be paying attention. Let's take a look at Lesson A, the myth of the A-plus proposal. Let's take a peek inside the black box. Now, why on earth do I have a picture of a gymnast to lead off Lesson A? You will find out. This is the session where I know we've got some surprises in store for you. So sit up, pay attention, and let's see where we're going. Everything we've been doing throughout this course, if you remember, has been built around frameworks. Frameworks for thinking from a 3D perspective. Frameworks for understanding the grantsmanship game landscape. Frameworks for getting inside the inner anatomy of a good grant proposal. Frameworks for digging inside each of the elements of a grant proposal and pulling out our good thinking and presenting it in a clear, concise, and compelling way that communicates with our reviewer the power and the clarity and the strength of our proposal plan. All of these frameworks add up to something. And what do they all add up to? Well, the reason we're doing this is that through these frameworks, by following the fill-in-the-blanks models, by following the templates and the checklist that we've been moving through, all of this is aiming to helping you construct what? An A-plus proposal. So you know now what it takes to construct an A-plus proposal. The question is, where does an A-plus proposal get you? So you've got one now. You're submitting it to Funder A, Funder B, Funder XYZ. It's an A-plus proposal. And where does it get you? It gets you into the finals round. Everything we've been doing up to this point with all our frameworks, all our work, everything that it takes to put that proposal together and get it out the door on time and in the hands of Funder A, B, or XYZ is all the preliminary round. It's all the qualifying round. It's what it takes to get you into the finals. What a shock that is, because when we are in the finals, the game changes. Now, this is something that practically nobody on the grant seeker side of the table really understands. We really think that it's all about following the funder's guidelines, crossing our T's, dotting our I's, making sure that we don't have anything in the proposal that the funder has told us not to include, and that we do have absolutely everything. We've got strong mission match. You know, all of that, everything we've been covered. We think that is what wins the grant award, and it is not. That's what gets us into the finals round. Bust this myth right now. An A-plus proposal will win the grant award every time. That is simply not true. And if you've ever had the experience of putting together a proposal that you know really nailed it, and you don't get the grant award, you know that's true. You probably don't know why that's true, and that's what we're going to be looking at here in this lesson. Let's bust another myth. This one's even more shocking. Try this one. An A-plus proposal will beat out a B-minus proposal every time. Guys, this is so tough for us recovering A-plus students, but that is also not true. So here's the deal, guys. The grantsmanship game is the game we play as grant seekers, but it is not the game that the grant makers play. If you take a look at the game board going all the way back to our very first session, we have all these beautiful little steps and blocks that are the activities that we're doing to move us through the landscape of the grantsmanship game, step by step, rule by rule, strategy by strategy. But there's a little disconnect that I wonder if you noticed, and it happens right in Rule 5, way down in that bottom left-hand corner. Create a winning proposal. Put it all together on paper. And there's the disconnect right there. I know you see an arrow. It doesn't look like a disconnect, but let's blow that up a little bit and take a look at the two squares on either side of that arrow. Do you see that? Square number 20 says submit qualified request by deadline. That's us getting our A+ proposal out the door on time. Square 21 says, get funded and thank the funder, as if there's absolutely nothing happening in between those two squares. But there is, and that's what I'm calling, just for fun, the black box. Because that's where our proposal disappears into this black hole of we don't know what really is going on with it. And out the other side of that black hole, after all of this stuff happening to it that we're not a part of, we can't see, it's invisible to us, we have no context for understanding it, we either get a yes, you're getting the award, or we get a no, sorry, unfortunately, not this time. And it's what happens inside that black box that's so mysterious to us. So an A+ proposal goes in, and out comes a sorry, no, not this time. How does that happen? Well, what I want to do is share with you what the grant makers game looks like, and how we can open up that black box and really understand what goes on in the final grant-making decision process. So here's what I want to do. Instead of talking about the black box, I want to give you a chance to be a part of what happens inside it. You're going to do an exercise here called Inside the Black Box. And this takes us back to our work with the Winning Edge Foundation. Let me give you the setup here. And then I'll walk you through this exercise that I think is going to blow the lid right off the black box for you. So we are back with the Winning Edge Foundation. Remember that? We've done a couple of You Be the Grant Maker exercises from inside the Winning Edge Foundation. We are now launching a new national grant making initiative that we're calling Community Approaches to Literacy. Okay. We have put out an RFP, a request for proposals, and we intend to select 4 proposals to award $100,000 each. So we've set aside $400,000 for this specific program. We intend to award 4 projects for $100,000 each. Now, in response to our request for proposals, we received 15 proposals. Those have all been scored by our team of community-based reviewers. So we sent all 15 proposals out to our team of community-based reviewers who represent a wide diversity across spectrum of positions and perspectives inside the broader community. We also gave them a very clear set of proposal scoring guidelines. They very diligently read and reviewed all 15 proposals. They came together as a team. They had deep conversation together collectively. They assigned final scores to all proposals, and they sent their recommendations back to us, ranked by the highest scoring proposals all the way down. All right. Our Board of Trustees is going to look at those recommendations and make the final funding decision. Okay. You are a new member of the Board of Trustees, so you're going to be participating in this process for the very first time, and you receive these ranked lists of proposals. Let's take a quick look at this. This actually is a snapshot of the top 7 proposals, and I'm really simplifying this. I want to give you a very simple and straightforward example to work with about inside the black box. So let's imagine that this is what you receive as a new trustee, and you're going to be going into the decision-making meeting the next morning. Now, that red dotted line across the bottom is represents a guidepost that we were also given that said essentially, for discussion purposes, we will consider proposals that score 85 points or above. So you can see that we have 6 proposals that scored 85 points and above. And we're going to take a look at those 6 proposals in terms of making our choice of 4. All right, so this is what you know at this point. So as a new trustee, just working with the information we just looked at here, Which 4 proposals do you suppose we will be selecting for final funding? Take a moment to think about that. Don't think too long. Again, this is a 2-part exercise, and this is the easy part. Just give you about 20 seconds to think about that. Push pause if you need to. So maybe you took the natural approach of saying, we'll just start with the top 4 ranked proposals. That's what we're here to do. We're here to fund the 4 best projects, and those will be reflected by the 4 best proposals, and the best proposals are the ones that scored the highest in our community-based review team process. We tasked our review team with being very, very conscientious about looking for a lot of really important qualities in the proposals that they reviewed. Again, they came together, they tussled it through, they came to a consensus about the point scores, and here we are. So our top 4 proposals, and the ones that I would imagine we would fund, are the ones from Seattle, Tacoma, New York, and Boston. How tough would that be, right? However, now you get to the review team meeting as a member of the Board of Trustees, and you find out that beyond mission, and all of the proposals that were submitted, all 15 that went forward for review, are a fit for the mission. Beyond mission, there are 2 additional criteria that are going to come to bear on the final funding decision. And here's the language around that. We at the Winning Edge Foundation are committed each year to selecting projects that reflect the greatest possible diversity and representation of the major regions of the country, as well as diversity in the high needs populations to be served by the projects awarded. Now, what I want you to do is take another look at that list of 6, actually 7 if you take a look below the red dotted line. Take a look at that same list, and with these criteria in mind, selecting projects that reflect the greatest possible diversity in representing the major regions of the country, number 1, and diversity in the high needs populations to be served, number 2, what might your final funding decision look like? Push pause and take some time with this one. If you're working on your own, take some time to think this through on your own. If you're with a team, this is a great conversation to have as a team. And then come back when you feel either kind of comfortable with the decision that you came up with or a little perplexed by the whole process. I'm going to talk you through one way that this conversation might have gone forward inside the black box. Push pause, come back when you're ready. All right, let's take a look at how this conversation might move forward, working with these 2 additional criteria of geographic diversity and diversity of the target population, the high needs people who will be served by this project. Keep in mind that if we were only scoring from the top proposal down, we would be scoring the 4 proposals that you see highlighted in yellow here. Let's take a look at what my Board of Trustees came up with. And this is what it looks like. Now compare that with what you came up with. And I am not saying that there is one right answer. As you see as we go through the conversation, where the heck did this come from? First of all, the top ranked proposal dropped off. The proposal from Seattle isn't even on this list. And take a look at that Tucson Native Americans proposal that was underneath the red dotted line, and now it is on the list. So that was an A-plus proposal that scored 98 points. 98 out of 100 is an A-plus in anybody's book. 82 points out of 100 is kind of a B- in most people's book. An A-plus proposal did not get funded. It did not make it through the finals. And a B- proposal did. Why? What happened? Let's take a look. It's a little tricky for me to talk this through by way of PowerPoint, but imagine this is on a big flip chart and I'm up there moving things around as my Board of Trustees has this conversation. What is actually happening inside the black box that creates that maybe very surprising result? So if we start with our top 4 proposals, right away, we see that top proposal, 98, is Seattle, Washington. Second proposal down is 95 points. That's Tacoma, Washington. Is that a problem for us? we're only going to be funding 4 proposals, and we place a high value on geographic diversity. We said that right up front. It's important to us that our final awards reflect representation from around the country. With that in mind, how likely is it that we're going to fund 2 out of 4 proposals, that 50% of our awards are going to go to 2 different projects in the state of Washington? And the fact is that it's not going to happen. Not in this funding process. So right away, we run into a situation where it looks like we're going to have to choose between our 2 top-rated proposals. All right, so let's set that aside for a moment. We've got question marks there. Let's set that aside and take a look a little bit further. Let's take a look at what happens when we look at the target population. Inside our top 4 proposals, we see that the top-rated proposal, Seattle, Washington, is working with the working poor. And we also see that proposal number 4 from Boston is targeting the working poor. So if we also value the greatest possible diversity inside the high needs populations that we're serving with this project, how likely is it that inside 4 projects, 2 of those projects are going to be working with the same high need population, the working poor? Very, very unlikely. So right there, again, we seem to have a forced choice situation. We're going to need to choose between the Seattle, Washington proposal, which is our highest rated proposal, and the proposal from Boston, which ranks 4th at 91. So we're not making any decisions yet. We're just kind of seeing what the cards look like as we start to think about what we've got ahead of us. Oh, here's something else too, guys. So we have 2 of our 4 top-rated proposals come from New York and Boston. These happen to both be cities in what? The northeastern portion of the United States. Again, a little hard for us to justify making 2 awards that reflect the interests of the same geographic part of the United States, even though the projects are completely different, even though the cities are completely different. If we're looking for geographic diversity, it would be hard to choose both of these proposals. So can you see just inside those top 4 proposals how many conflicts we have as we're trying to move things around to say which combination of proposals is going to give us maximum geographic diversity and maximum diversity among our high needs populations being served? So how are we going to approach this? Already we know that at least 2 of our top proposals are probably going to fall out of the running, which means we can confidently go down 2 more proposals and say, well, at the very least, look at all those question marks, we can say okay, at least provisionally, to the next 2 proposals down. Is there a conflict with Georgia? Are there any other southern states represented? No. Is farm workers going to conflict with anybody? Nobody else is working with farm workers. Okay, great. How about Chicago, Illinois? Do we have any other proposals above us that are in the Midwest? No, we don't. What about inner city youth? Ooh, we do, don't we? Okay. So if we go with Atlanta and Chicago, let's say okay to those, and let's see what happens when we bring those into the mix. So instantly we see that because we've got inner city youth as our focus for the Chicago proposal, we're going to need to redline New York. Do you see that red line right through that? Why? Because they're also focusing on inner city youth. And we're looking for maximum diversity in terms of our high need population served. So if we say yes to Chicago, we're going to say no to New York. Now, if we say no to New York, what happens? Now we can say yes to Boston because we're no longer in conflict in terms of 2 projects in the Northeast. All right, so let's say yes to Boston, which is a working poor focus project. And now what happens? We look up and we say, oh, but look, our top-rated proposal from Seattle is also addressing the working poor. So if we say yes to Boston working poor, that means we're going to say No to Seattle working poor, because we're duplicating our high need population. So now look what happens. If we say no to Seattle, we can say yes to Tacoma. We no longer have a conflict in terms of being part of the Pacific Northwest. And now we have 4 qualified proposals for our final round. We have Tacoma, Washington, Boston, Massachusetts, Atlanta, Georgia, Chicago, Illinois, 4 different portions of the country. We're working with refugees, we're working with working poor, we're working with farm workers, we're working with inner city youth. 4 different target populations. Perfect choice. So we're thinking that we're in good shape to move forward with our final decisions when one of our board of trustees says, hold on just a minute, guys. Let's talk about that proposal from Tucson, Arizona. And everybody says, great. You know, it's not final till it's final, and that's what we're here for. And she says, you know, I've been looking back over our records, and it's been 4 years since we funded a project through the Winning Edge Foundation that serves Native Americans. Now, I know this is a new initiative. This is our first time going into the community-based literacy initiative. But I think it sends the wrong message to our constituents nationwide that in the last 4 years, out of all the projects we funded, not a single one of them had specifically focused on services to Native Americans. I'd like us to reconsider that proposal. And so the conversation happens and people begin to come on board with that idea. And then they say, what happens? What would we trade off for that? And then the conversation becomes around what other proposal that we have highlighted in green would we trade for the proposal from Tucson? Because through the conversation, we decide we're going to redline the Atlanta, Georgia Farm Workers Program for who knows what reason. That's part of the conversation. And now we have a mix of 4 that includes the proposal from Tucson, Arizona, the Native Americans. And there's our final 4. Now, if you're sitting here saying, wait a minute, the Tucson proposal falls below that dotted red line, it's not a qualified proposal. It doesn't meet the standard. We said we were only going to consider proposals above that red line, above 85 points. Yeah, but who made that decision? We did. And why did we make that decision? To guide us in our decision making. Was it a hard and fast rule? Not in our organization. It could be in another grant maker's organization, but for us, that was a guideline we gave ourselves to help us begin to focus our thinking, just as everything else that we've been talking about has been a guideline as well. So in the end, what we're saying is, you know what? That dotted line is just a guideline. It's not a rule. And the other thing, guys, is that when you enter the final round, the points don't matter. The points don't matter. Can you see that? By the time we got these recommendations from our community review team, what they were doing was saying, these are the ones we think should be your finalists. And then the game changes, because the game then becomes, among the finalists, what's the best combination of awards that's going to help us achieve our overall goals? In terms of mission, definitely, all of them meet that, but also in terms of geographic diversity and the diversity of the high-need population being served. And once we bring those 2 factors into the mix, the points no longer matter. Can you see that? It just drives people crazy to realize that we work so hard for those points. Every single point is so precious. Yes, it can be. And I want to let you know that what I'm sharing with you here is a very simplified version of one way that this conversation can go. I'm not saying the points never matter. I'm saying that they are not the only factor. They are rarely the only factor when it comes to the final decisions, that there's almost always something else going on in those conversations for the final decision makers that we don't see, we can't control. It's invisible to us, and in fact, it may not even be in the request for proposals. And even if it was, it isn't anything at all that we could do anything about. If I'm in Seattle, Washington, and I'm developing a proposal to serve the working poor, I have no control at all over the fact that there's a competing proposal coming in from Tacoma. So those are factors I have no control over. What do I have control over? What I have control over is getting into the finals. What I have control over is writing an A+ proposal every single time. My job is to get into the finals. And what happens inside that black box is really, I almost said, no concern of mine. And I know that's hard to hear. But at that point, there is nothing we can do as grant seekers to impact the outcome of that final decision, because the factors that are going into making that final decision are not factors that we can influence or control by and large. All right, so here's our final four, and you can see again that the points just disappeared. And you can imagine for the funder, when Seattle comes back in and says, we thought we had a great proposal, can you tell us why we weren't selected? What would you say? Right? What was wrong with our proposal? The answer is nothing was wrong with your proposal. It was a fine proposal. The reviewers loved your proposal. In the final mix, however, other proposals served better to accomplish the goals we had in terms of geographic diversity and diversity of target population. So let's take a look at some lessons from inside the black box beyond mission. If your head isn't spinning around by now, I don't know what. And again, I talk with people all the time who have been in on the review team process. Imagine this review team, this community team is sending forth these proposals, expecting that the top 4 ranked proposals are going to be selected for funding. And instead they see this result come back and they're going, what the what? Why did that happen? Why don't they follow our recommendations? Well, the black box factor says there's another game happening here. There are other things that are now important to us in terms of creating that final mix of funded projects. So let's take a little bit of a look here. Every grant maker has its own version of the black box. Every grant maker. For some it has to do with geographic diversity. For some it has to do with target population. Some will do their very best to fund from the top down. Some will simply get in there and start to have this deep conversation, and it will be very fluid and organic, and out of that will emerge a consensus of some kind. Sometimes the final decision maker is one person who's looking at the ranked recommendations of a program officer, and that one person makes decisions based on multitude of factors. Sometimes it's like that example on the Native Americans. We haven't funded a Native American project for quite a while, and I've been thinking about that, and I would really like to advocate that we consider doing that this time around. So there are other purposes beyond what's in the RFP that are being served by the final decision making. In other words, it's less like the Olympics. It's less like the first 3 proposals to cross the finish line get the medals, and more something like an audition. So what's an audition? An audition is about trying out a variety of people or characters or actors or dancers or performers of some kind to find those that are going to fit together best to create the portfolio or ensemble of funded projects that best furthers their specific intentions, whatever those intentions are. And those intentions are the black box. All right, so they're saying, given the proposals that we have in front of us, which combination is going to best further our specific intentions, our goals, our purpose inside our grant-making mission? So if we think about it in that sense, then we're being much more realistic. And then it's not so much about we got those points we should have gotten funded, and more about, we got in the finals, and that's what really matters. And we did the very best we could. That's what really matters. And that's what I really want you to see. Your job is to show up with the very best you've got every single time. and understand that the other proposals are also showing up with the very best they've got every single time, perhaps, and that the funder's decision is very dependent on the particular mix of proposals that they're considering in any given funding round. And they're looking among those proposals to create the portfolio or ensemble or grouping of funded projects that best furthers their specific intentions. So again, I gave you a really streamlined, simplified example of what this can look like, but I want to let you know this kind of example came straight from a lot of my work with federal funding projects, which can be very mystifying if people don't understand this black box concept at all. So much so that the final funding award decisions were being challenged again and again and again by proposing organizations that knew that they had scored high, but that projects that scored lower than theirs were funded. And so they were challenging the final funding decisions. And so now, I guess starting a few years ago, the federal agencies will typically include in their request for proposals very specific language that says other factors may come into play in making the final funding decisions, including but not limited to geographic diversity and diversity among target populations, programmatic diversity, and so on. So they wanted to make it explicit as possible, to say, hey guys, the points aren't the only thing that matter. The points will get you into the finals, but that's not where the final decision making happens. So the question is, what can we do about this? The whole course has been how to do a better job of getting grants by writing better proposals. This is that black box section, that disconnect with the arrow on our grantsmanship game. There isn't anything we can do about this. There isn't anything we should do about this. There isn't anything we need to do about this other than to understand this is the way it works. And then we can be less, what can I say? We can take any energy that we might have been spinning around, worrying about why a particular proposal didn't get funded. We should look at our proposals. We should look at the quality of what we're presenting. We should look at the clarity of the language that we're using. We should always strive to do a better job in the proposal itself. But when we've done the very best we can and we know that we've submitted an A+ product and we don't get funded, we can take whatever energy we might have put into thinking it's all a political process, or it's all so random, or it's all just a crapshoot, all language that I've heard people say again and again and again, and put that energy instead into continuing to develop the relationships with the grant makers, continuing to deepen our planning around our wonderful projects, and continuing to always craft and improve our proposals themselves. So what can we do about it? We can relax. We can say, oh, that explains everything. And then we get to just relax. So with that in mind, let's continue exploring the reality check of what really is going on in that black box, if you will, by taking a look at Lesson B, the inner world of the grant maker. So take a bit of a break if you need to, come right on back, and we will jump right inside Lesson B.